As a revenue operator, the way I think about my job is how do we just stay in the chaos of hypergrowth? We're building this revenue engine for a $100 million business, not a $10 million business.
Dini Mehta was incredibly successful as the CRO of Lattice. She took the company from $3 million to over $100 million in ARR when she left. Dini and I also happen to go way back. We worked together for 3 years at Lattice, where she ran sales and I ran marketing. So I thought she'd be the perfect guest for our new show. Welcome to the first episode of Grow and Tell, the show where we tell the growth stories of revenue leaders behind successful companies. I'm your host, Alex Krakov.
Grow and tell, grow and tell.
Dini's entire career has been a series of growth stories. At Quantcast, she went from AE to sales manager. At Drawbridge, she went from the first sales hire to the VP of sales. And then at Lattice, she went from VP to CRO. Today, I'll be talking to Dini about the early days of Lattice, including our go-to-market strategy, how we moved up market, and how we collaborated across sales and marketing. Plus, Dini gives some advice on how to grow from an AE to a CRO. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So let's start with what Lattice was like when you joined. Can you paint a picture for us? How big was the sales team and what was the starting ARR?
Gosh, taking it back to June 2018. When I joined, the sales team was 7 people. I want to say 4 AEs, maybe 5 AEs, couple BDRs. I think overall go to market across marketing, sales, success, we were 15, 20 people. It was definitely the smallest company I joined. It was like 3 million in ARR. And I joined in summer, which are typically slow sales months, which, note to self, remind yourself that summer's going to be slow. Because when I joined, it was first 3 months, the goal was to grow revenue, and we were seeing a little bit of stalling in our new business growth. I'm sure you remember those days.
Yep.
But it was fun. I mean, I came from a background of doing enterprise sales, mostly selling to Fortune 500 marketing orgs. And so it was a new environment, which I was excited about. And when I was interviewing and talking to Lattice, it looked much bigger from the outside, thanks to the billboards and all the work you and
good
Kim
marketing,
did.
Yeah.
And coming in, I was like, ooh, this is early. Yeah, because I hadn't managed a sales rep in a couple of years prior to that. So I was like, okay, go back to your, flex brain, start to go back to it. But it was such a fun time because, we were all in it together. We were all trying to build this business, grow the company, and you could see the impact of your work within weeks. So it was a fun time. Gosh, so many stories.
Yeah. And so it wasn't really, it sounds like Jack might have oversold how big we were a little bit, which is, good job as a CEO. And so was it more like you had to be more of a player coach than you sort of expected? Like, were you actually running deals and kind of getting into the weeds with Seth and the rest of the reps?
No, I think Seth and the team were so good at closing deals. So I was mostly learning about HR tech, learning about high velocity sales, learning about inbound business. I think it was the first time I'd been at a company where there was actual inbound demand. And so coming in, I was like, what? There's just people coming to us wanting a demo, what? This is weird. And so, it was different where I actually closed 2 deals on my own just to get some street cred with the team. And so a little bit of player coachy there, but my goal was to mostly learn about the market and the dynamics with our competitors and sort of how we were selling deals and, what are the growth paths that we could potentially take on. It was the first month I remember I was like, oof, this is different, very different than coming from a Series E, later stage, $120 million business to yep, here we are.
No, those were fun times. I feel
Totally.
Did you start in the battery office or the
That's
Howard
right.
office?
We had 2 battery offices. Remember?
Oh, yeah, we had the 2 battery offices. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the 22 battery office with the infamous 1 bathroom.
Yes, the 1 bathroom and the bathroom key. Oh my God. Yeah, we don't need a TMI for this podcast. So you approached learning was your main goal, but I feel like once you got settled and you sort of got a sense of the HR market and the team, and you sort of accepted how early Lattice was, what were your initial priorities? Do you remember kind of what your initial goals were?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously goal number 1, 2, 3 as a revenue leader is grow revenue. How do we change the trajectory of the new business growth? And obviously you and I were close in that. How do we sort of build this out together? And I quickly realized that there was so much opportunity. I mean, my mind was blown that there were some reps doing 8 calls a day. And I was like, there is just so many leads. We're clearly in this like lead abundant environment, which means we've got to add a lot of capacity, make some real structural changes to the organization. It's always hard when you're like the 5 reps that are getting all the leads and you're like, okay, we're going to double the team in the next 3 months. And so my first priority was we got to add capacity because clearly the market is there. We're seeing the demand and there's a ton of opportunity. Just within the existing segment, which was, I think our ASP was what, I want to say like 3,000 or 4,000 then.
Yeah.
It was like, super, which was, we were closing $800 deals. And I was like, why are we closing $800 deals? And so first priority was like, how do we increase capacity? 2, is there an opportunity for us to crawl up market? And 3, is there an opportunity for us to like build the outbound muscle? Because clearly we'd gotten to that stage mostly, let's say 99% through inbound and the work the marketing team had done in creating that brand and the demand for us. So those are the 3 things I quickly realized, that how can I take some of the things, because I came from an outbound enterprise environment, take some of those learnings and apply it to this. But I wanted to make sure that I did it in the right sort of HR tech, in the Lattice way versus just, pattern match from our old world, because I've done that mistake. I've seen others make that mistake.
I think that sounds right. And I think one of the big things moves you made was like segmenting the sales team. Can you talk a little bit about how that helped both develop reps, but also help us move up market a little?
Because when I joined, we were basically round robin, inbound leads. Everybody was selling all deals. And we wanted to double from 5 to 10 reps as quickly as we could. And we knew that if we went to that, we had to be thoughtful about how we grew demand in line with that capacity growth, but also hiring the right rep profile to match that growth. That way we weren't sort of just hiring generalists, because we had a great team of generalists that were able to sort of stretch and do, $2,000 deals and $10,000. That was the stretch back then. And so you were like, how do we now segment? And we knew that we were, building the org, not for 10 reps, but how do we get to like 70 reps over the next few years? And so, a lot of sort of building the stack around scalable stack across sales, marketing, ops, and then segmentation of saying, okay, we don't want to, a lot of times when people think about upmarket, they think about almost, sort of saying, we're not going to focus on the business that got us here and only go up, like pivot. We didn't want to do that because we had a great business. And what we wanted to do is like slowly put bets in place that would allow us to continue to be in hyper growth. Because, as a revenue operator, the way I think about my job is, how do we just stay in the chaos of hyper growth? It's like we earn the right to get there once, but the harder part is, how do we put the mini bets where we stay there year after year? And so the segmentation was such a key part of that. Building the stack was a key part of that allow us to really scale the engine and the operation. Because, that's where like moving away from just the player coach and managing this team to like, hey, we're building this revenue engine for $100 million business, not a $10 million business.
Let's get into like the move up market a little bit, because you like the segmentation was like the first step, and then I thought the way you did it was really elegant, where like we hired Val, right, to kind of do exploratory stuff for like a year, and then product was like trying to catch up, and then it evolved from there. Can you talk about kind of the evolution of us trying to experiment up market? Because it was not just like we started and it was working right away. There was a lot of work that went into that.
Yeah, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears of a lot of people. I remember when I think the reason we even decided upmarket, because we started closing these deals. I think it was Slack, which was the deal that we closed, and I was shocked. I was like, Slack wants to buy us. We haven't made any product investments, go to market investments, and here we are getting pulled up market because they evaluated all the other solutions and picked us, which is like, okay, this is a sign. There's clearly something here. And we've got to start seeding this. And so, yeah, we hired Val, who's, super experienced. She came on board. Luckily, we got lucky that she was like, yeah, I'll come do this and help build that out. And the goal was to just do customer discovery and learn from our existing, like the handful of large customers we had, and some that we hadn't made the right sort of decisions in how we set them up, and some that were a really good fit. And so, how can we learn from both and use that to design how we crawl up market? And I was like, I remember constantly correcting people, like, we're not moving up market, we are crawling up market, because it typically takes years to do, go to outbound, move up market. And, in startups, everything moves fast and you want the results next month or the next quarter. And unfortunately, these moves, especially if you're not going to abandon your existing base, take so much longer. And so I remember constantly like reiterating to the company, to the board, which is like, we are crawling up market, which is going to take us a while. And like even getting the team okay with that, because it's hard being a salesperson, knowing that you're not going to get all the resources for this, experimental segment that you're out doing discovery for. And we were lucky. We had great people. They were excited about that challenge of sort of testing it out, and then sort of putting the really putting the machinery around it.
How did you think about relationship between sales and sort of the other functional teams like in this move up market? Because, it's like the product wasn't ready. So there was the sales team is like doing all this discovery and talking to customers, and then they got to go back to the product team. And then you're coming back to me on the marketing side being like, how do we get more enterprise leads? Like, how did you think about managing all those different stakeholders? And I don't know, what was challenging about it? What worked well?
Yeah, I think that was maybe the most important piece, which is how do we make sure that everyone recognizes that this is a company initiative and not just a sales initiative or a go-to-market initiative. I think a lot of companies sort of get that wrong, where they're like, well, yeah, our product works. We've got 5 customers that are in this segment. Let's just put like a 6-person sales team and it'll magically work. But the reality is, like, sales is the last piece. There's so much stuff that happens before that. And, if you build a great sort of back end machine that helps sales do their job well. And so I recognized, and I'd made these mistakes in the past where sort of, I was just focused on my team versus thinking broadly across the company. And I really wanted to make sure that in this case, we were all clear eyed, which was one of our Lattice values, around really focusing on doing it as a company. And so, yeah, it was, I remember going to Eric, a co-founder who ran product, and I was like, you got to build these, key enterprise features. And he's like, no, like he's like, no, we're just not going to do it. Look at the revenue split. Why would I spend any time on this segment when we've got all these customers asking? And, it was a fair pushback given the sort of resource constraint and the bandwidth constraint. And I had different versions of that with everyone across the different department heads. But I think ultimately folks got that long term, if we want to become $100 million+ business, we can't just do it by focusing on what, sort of, and Jack was obviously super supportive of it, which helped. But yeah, not a lot of sort of negotiating and seeing sort of, yeah, fine, we'll give up on that, but give us couple resources to help us move crawl up market.
Yeah. I feel like Eric and the product team learned by like being put in the fire what it meant to go up market. Like I remember, I won't say the customer, but I remember one customer tried to like run a review with like 10,000 people, and it like clicked the button to send the performance review off, and it like just didn't work because our backend system like wasn't meant to, send 10,000 emails at once. And I remember Eric and the team like staying up all night to fix that and get it out the door. And that was like a good, I think, moment for him where I was like, oh yeah, like we do need to do a lot here to support these big enterprise customers. So yeah.
It's so true. I remember we would just and we learned that we just got to bring Eric on more prospect calls, because it's like, hey, here's this large deal where everything matches except for this one little thing, which is considered table stakes. And of course, he's like, yeah, we can build that. And yeah, it was so true. That was the trick that eventually we learned.
Yeah, no, honestly, just get a CTO on the call and then tell them how much money they could make if they just build the thing, and tell them that they can't do it. And then they'll go build it in like an hour overnight
True.
just to prove everybody else wrong. Yeah. Uh, so the HR market is incredibly competitive. We had Reflective and Culture Amp and 15.5 and all the HRIS systems that we were competing with. And Lattice was kind of this new kid on the block. And we started in the SMB. We're slowly working our way up. And I'm curious, like, how did you think about competitive sales? How did you think about selling against all these competitors, and how did that sort of play out over time?
Gosh, yeah, I think in some ways, um, because I didn't know much about the space, it helped me. Like ignorance is bliss. So I came in and I was used to working in a super noisy market. Like I saw this sort of over the decade that I was selling to marketers, the evolution of all the noise. It sort of went through a ton of competitors, a lot of noise, and then it consolidated down to the big three. And so that helped sort of the context around, hey, the noise is a good thing when there's a lot of competition. That means there's a lot of money and there's a lot of opportunity for us to like grab market share. It's tempting in those environments, especially if you have competitors that are sort of throwing dirt and saying, seeding lies in market to prospects to play the game with them, right? Sort of get on their level. I'm a big believer of not giving competitors airtime in our show. And so, which was hard, which is like, hey, if a prospect asks about a competitor, we don't get down and say they suck at this, they suck at that. Here's the 5 things you're never going to get from them. Instead, we just focus on the things we do really well and really sell with integrity, really care for the customer, because ultimately, like my core driving principle as a revenue leader is the number one thing we sell is the fact that we care. It's there's always going to be a competitor with a better brand or with more money or a better feature set, but sales and go to market overall can be a differentiator. And I think we really embraced that at Lattice, where we were like, we're going to do things the right way. We're going to focus on the customer, where we're going to really care about the customer and just build from there. And so I think just making sure that the team really embraced and internalized that sort of ethos of ultimately focus on the customer, focus on our product, but have the confidence, even though we were the new company on the block, where a lot of folks would be like, oh, Lattice, no, you don't want to work with them. And, it's awesome to watch that over the years, we took a lead position through our execution and just focus on the customer and the market ultimately. But yeah, I remember it was early on, I was shocked at sort of the dirty games that some of the competitors would play, and we were able to rise above that.
One of the smartest moves we made at Lattice was combining performance management and employee engagement in one platform. And we were kind of the first company to ever do that. We became this like multi-product company early in our life cycle. Can you talk about that moment and how did it help transform the company and impact kind of the sales team?
Yeah, I remember that was like 3 months after I joined, and we were making this big, it was the first time we were doing a second product, and we were getting feedback that like, are we distracting from our focus? Because we had a great business selling performance management, and it's like, do we really want to move into this? And in hindsight, it was a really smart strategic move, and clearly it became part of our core strategy of releasing product velocity and releasing a new product every year or a couple of years, getting the team across go to market to learn the product, which was new sort of use cases. I remember our CEO Jay Zach and we just sat in a conference room and we played trainer, where everybody had to come in and do a mock pitch and get certified. And we just sat there for 2 days, hour after hour, and we would fail people. We'd be like, no, you got to go back and study because this wasn't good enough. Because we wanted to make sure that if we're launching this big product, it was a big moment in the company, that we weren't on demo calls not knowing sort of basic features and basic questions. But in hindsight, it was fun, but also such a waste of time. For 2 days, we were just locked up in this hot conference room. But then I think it became our playbook for every time we released a new product. It's like, this is how we certify the team. Here's the things we need to do across marketing, sales, success. And we learned, we got better every time. And I'm sure there's still things we could have done, we could have done better in those moments. But big moment for us where we became that sort of multi-product company. And I remember thinking about, should we have a different team that just focuses, product specific teams? Like have a team that's focused on engagement, have a team focused on performance. But the complexity and the upside just I didn't think it was worth it. And it allowed us to really increase our contract sizes. It allowed reps to feel empowered, to close bigger deals, make more money. And so I think it sort of aligned all the incentives to keep it with the sales team, at least early on.
And I think it also it made our competitors squirm too. Because it was crazy is we launched that, and then it was amazing to watch each of our competitors slowly build the same features and functionalities. And then all of our homepages and websites started to sort of merge on the same messaging and stuff. And it was the first time I was like, oh, wow, this is what leading a category shift actually feels like. And I still look back and I think that was the smartest move that, we give Jack, the CEO, credit for making, that ultimate call. Cause I think it was a bold bet at the time where everyone was like, you have this thing that's working, you're really going to go multi-product that fast. And, looking back, that's what launched Lattice into sort of this next level company. And now there's a whole suite of products that they sell. It's pretty crazy.
100%. I mean, and I remember as soon as we launched a new product, we'd see an increase in our win rates for 9 months. And then we'd sort of, it would normalize because the competitors would then catch up with our marketing and product messaging, or at least partly catch up. And so we learned that the first time. And then we were like, okay, we've got to be really prepared and make the most of this 12-month, 24-month heads up that we get in this race. But yeah, definitely a very smart move.
Yeah. Good job, Jack.
Yeah.
So your superpower, I always thought, was building incredible sales cultures. Your team loved you and the vibes were always amazing. And I'd love to know what's your secret? How do you think about building strong sales cultures?
This is the question that I tend to get the most, which is, I'm outside looking in, it looks like you have a great culture, teams, and I've sort of tried to think about it because it's I don't think there is a secret here. It's great teams, I've always felt that great teams are built on a foundation of trust and accountability. And when I first started in sales, I remember being in a sales management meeting and our manager was telling us something and everyone's like, yep, we'll do that. And we all left the meeting and they're like, we're not going to do that. The reps were telling each other. I was like, why didn't we just tell the manager that we're not going to do it? Why do we say yes in that room and then walked out? That's not cool to be part of this team where the manager is clearly putting all this thought into it. And we're going to say yes and then go do something completely different. And I knew that when I became a manager, I really wanted a culture where people would feel comfortable enough to voice opposing opinions and push back and give feedback. And so I think they're built on yes, accountability is key because you're in sales, we got to deliver revenue. But you also need trust where I can sort of give very direct feedback to someone. They can give feedback to me. And I think that happens through fostering psychological safety where people feel comfortable being themselves, questioning the strategy, sharing the feedback, and then also being okay if their feedback isn't taken, even if it doesn't get implemented, they have a voice, they don't have a vote. And so how do you do that is, I think mostly what I know how to do it is just prioritizing values and culture in everything from who you hire, who you promote, your go-to-market, your sales strategy, your performance management practices, your career tracks. We had values and culture in everything, in our monthly call, in our weekly call. We started with that. So everybody knew, and I cared about it deeply, where if somebody's tried to, if there was lack of integrity in how we sold, or if somebody was, you're stealing someone's lead, that would go, even when we were, a 100-person team, it would go up to me. And I'd be like, why is this happening? We're all on the same team and we've got to embrace a culture of abundance. Because most sales team, unfortunately, are built on fear and scarcity, which is let's pit one person against another, one team against another, one region against another. And I remember when I started in sales, I was like, I was crushing it. And I had my friends and teammates that weren't. And my manager was like, you can't help them because they're on a different team. I was like, this is silly. We're all on the same team. and we're going up against our competitors. And the goal is to grow the pie, not sort of just redivide the pie amongst ourselves. And I think this applies to sales and marketing too. Like we have such a strong relationship where a lot of respect for all the work marketing did for sales. And I think marketing really cheered sales on, knowing that, hey, ultimately you're going to go out and close the deal. So we're going to do everything to help you. And sort of sales recognized that they couldn't do it on their own. And we needed marketing. So I think it sort of all goes back to the same thing of like respect, the values are key, embracing a culture of abundance.
And I think you also did such a good job like injecting just energy and creating a fun environment. And like you also are like a meme maker, I feel like, within a sales team. Like there's so many little catchphrases you came up with that just like, and they're all funny and get people excited. And like your present, I wish we could show one of your presentations because there's so many hashtags and things, but like, and it's all like, funny, but it got people excited and created this sort of vibe on the team. Like what we had, one team, one dream, right? That was like
Yep.
the marketing and sales thing. And then I'm going to butcher this, but like sick, right? It was
Yeah.
always your catchphrase and like became such a thing. And then Luke on the design team was just making Dini memes and things. And so I don't know. It's like you just did such a good job, like creating such a unique culture. It was really fun to watch.
I think it's just fun to do it. It's like,
Yeah.
we're going to do this hard thing of building this company, and startups are hard. You don't have a lot of resources and bandwidth, and why not have some fun with it? But oh gosh, the memes. Friday by day. We had automated GIFs in Slack that were like, would give me nightmares because it would show up so many times. Gosh, fun times.
I forgot about that one too. My God. So you've hired like hundreds of salespeople, maybe thousands in your career. What makes a great sales rep, and like what do you look for usually in the hiring process?
Yeah, I think hiring such a key. It's like that's where it all starts. Like hiring the right team for the right sort of matching the company and the market to the team. I think the things that I've consistently seen like broadly work. There's sort of nuances within the business, like the persona, like the HR persona is very different than the marketing persona or the sales persona. And so I think there's nuance to like, what is this specific persona? What is the best sales rep for this specific persona? So that is sort of outside of that. I think it's curiosity, integrity, and grit. Like those are the three qualities that uniformly matter a lot more, I think matter a lot more than some of the other things that people get fixated on like pattern matching resumes. Like our first, I think 15 folks in sales, 15, 20 folks, I want to say, had no HR tech experience. It's like people from all different backgrounds. And I think that helped us because we didn't limit ourselves to like, what, this is what I'd done before, so this is what we're going to do. We were all sort of learning together and we were like, let's just try and see where this takes us. And it helped us be creative and innovate. But yeah, I think going back to the sales reps, it's curiosity, integrity, and grit.
I'd love to switch gears and talk a little bit about like the personal development of a salesperson over time. Because I think there's like a huge difference between closing a deal, right, as an AE and then managing a sales team as a sales manager versus being a director of sales versus being a VP and then eventually a CRO. And I'd love to like think about these different stages. Like what do you see as sort of the major differences? And I think maybe it's more obvious between AE and manager, but then maybe gets a little blurry as you sort of move up in sales leadership. So yeah, how do you think about it changing over time?
Totally. I think the AE and the manager one is probably one of the bigger jumps. And I almost think about it as parallel tracks. I think a lot of companies set it up where like, oh, you're an AE, you crush your quota, next step is become a manager. And I think that's just wrong. Consistency in getting to quota and following process and being a good team player does, but getting to 200%, doesn't really tell me anything. And so I've always had manager and sort of the senior AE at different tracks. And so I think it is different. And we had a team lead program, if you remember, where folks could test it. And we had folks like Seth, who was, an early sales rep, and he was a team lead, and he was like, I love it, because it was meant to give reps exposure into management tasks and see if they actually like it. And so he did it for a quarter, and he's like, I love it. This is what I want to do. And we promoted him into a manager. And we had Haley Wolf, who was also an AE and said, I want to be a manager. And she became a team lead. She did it for a couple quarters and she's like, oh, I don't know. I like selling. I want to keep selling because I have my autonomy. And so it was it was a great sort of way for people to sort of test the waters of what management meant. And sort of the biggest difference in going, in each of those levels is like your level of control continues to reduce, but your level of accountability continues to increase. So it's a really weird thing to manage your own psyche against. Like when I was a rep, I had full control of my book of business, how I'm going to get to my number, what do I do? Like I can control every piece of it. Became a manager, then I have to, I've sort of focused on my team and hope that they get to their number so I get to mine. And the higher up you go, it just, you've got more and more accountability. Ultimately, I'm on the hook if we don't make our revenue number in front of the board, but I can't really make deals happen. And sort of, the reality is the team is doing all the work. And I'm just here facilitating and making sure that they have the right resources and the right sort of setup to be successful. So I think that is the hardest part for people to jump from every level. And at the C level, it's like you're a company leader.
So let's say I'm a VP of sales right now and I want to be a CRO. Like, what advice would you give to me? Like, how do I prove that I am CRO worthy? Is it thinking through like other functions like customer success and marketing and trying to understand those? Is it just getting better at sales? Like, yeah, what advice do you give to a VP of sales who wants to be a CRO?
Yeah, I think that is the part where it starts to get blurry. But my advice would be focusing on the company as a general company leader versus as a sales leader. Like you're always going to be the sales leader. Like that's in your DNA. If you've grown up in sales, you'll always sort of think about how do you grow revenue? How do you focus on getting to highest attainment? But how do you really understand all the different pieces that have to go right for sales to do well? And so, yeah, it's becoming a general company leader where you could theoretically go run any department because you've got the sort of, you understand the different mechanics of how departments work, you're strategic. And so I think that is the key piece where you have, and, I think as the team grew, I spent less and less time with sales as a CRO and more time with other departments. Like my first team was the exec team and making sure that, the customer journey is uniform. Like you are, as a revenue leader of the company, you're the single point of accountability for all things growth and revenue, regardless of your purview, regardless of, what you formally own. It's ultimately you're accountable. And if that is too much, then a VP of sales, like you're responsible for your team's number, your region's number, and making sure that that is executed well. But as a revenue operator, you're thinking 2 years ahead and saying, how do I make sure that we're setting ourselves up to continue growing, not just this year's plan, but also next year? Like, what are the bets I'm seeding? So I think you're sort of the focus, as a VP of sales, I'm probably thinking 1 or 2 quarters ahead. As a CRO, you have to think 1 or 2 years ahead. That is the biggest difference, I'd say.
And let's talk about that exec team and kind of managing up, because so much of your job is working with the CEO and the board and the CFO and building a plan. And then you have to communicate your progress along the way. And then you have to, show the forecast and all that. Can you just like give us a window into what that experience was like?
Oh gosh, so fun. That became bigger and bigger part of my job over time. And I think there's a lot of art and science to it. And, it's one of those things where you have to have all these different pieces come together, where it's very grateful to have a great finance team that was helping us sort of put the pieces together. And on the flip side, we had ops and us sort of coming in and saying, here's, the top down plan, the bottoms up plan, and what feels realistic. I still remember my first board meeting where I think it was just like 4 or 5 of us. And I came from, my past companies, board meetings were a big deal. We were Kleiner Sequoia backed. And so we were, very buttoned up. And I was like, I remember my first Lattice board meeting. It was awesome. We were just eating croissants and talking about the business. And then of course, over time it evolved. But And I think going through a pandemic and moving all the sort of things that have happened in the last 3 years, our planning cycles almost became from going from annual cycles to it felt like we were doing it quarterly because things were changing so rapidly. But so much of planning is sort of seeing both sides, negotiating and saying, hey, what feels realistic? I get that the spreadsheet says this. Here's the reality on the ground on what it takes to execute that spreadsheet to, getting the team to buy in and do this in a reasonable time frame without hurting culture. Because the other piece is like you can grow too fast and short term it may work. And long term, you've overhired capacity, you don't have enough leads, and it caused all kinds of problems. And so my job again was to sort of bridge that gap between the board expectations, the finance point of view, and of course our point of view from the go-to-market is like, hey, here's what we can actually get done. And then communicating that to every person so people sort of internalize and understand why we're doing this and why it matters.
And I feel like every board member always wants to increase the numbers and move faster and hire more sales reps. And you look at the spreadsheet and you're like, wait, you have 5 sales reps? Why don't you go to 10 and you'll hit your number faster? And like, I'm curious how you emotionally process that as a sales leader, because that's stressful, like, right? And Lattice was pretty successful, like the whole time we were there, but like, it was always more and more and more. And so, yeah, how do you like emotionally handle that? Is it just like take a deep breath and deal with it, or what's your take?
A lot of wine.
Yeah, a lot of wine. Good. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like, I think that's there's, sometimes it can feel like, well, if we don't do well, there's clearly a lot of heat you take. It's the highest accountability role. Like ultimately you're on the hook to deliver revenue. There's no excuses, the buck stops at you. But on the flip side, when you do well, it's like, well, are we too, why is our attainment 100%? It should be 80%. And we early on, we really wanted to keep our attainment high for cultural reasons to build that foundation of winning, which, is hard because the traditional way of thinking is do 80% attainment and make sure that you have more people capacity. And even if 20% of them aren't hitting quota. And so, yeah, it was, how do I cope? Mostly wine.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I think we were a pretty good team together, me and you, running marketing and sales. And I feel like we didn't fight really like most marketing and sales teams do. Like looking back, why do you think that was? What made it work?
I mean, I think we had such a good, it never felt, we were all on the same team. And I think people said that all the time, like one team, one dream. I remember reps would join and it's like, because it goes back to like no finger pointing, like we are all in this together and we're going to focus on how do we grow this pie versus, the traditional sort of MQL versus SQL. I even remember early on, we didn't talk about attribution for the first few years, which, is traditionally everybody's like, oh, focus on your attribution and really get it right. And we were like, we're just going to grow the business because we know even for outbound, we knew that we couldn't get to outbound unless marketing was out there, marketing to these folks quarters ahead, years ahead, right? To create that sort of air cover. And so I think that sort of philosophy, and kudos to Jack for giving us that autonomy to just sort of focus on building the business versus like getting over focused on, sort of resourcing and attribution and where does the budget go. And I think that really helped us in building it together. And yeah, I think that was the most fun part because we didn't do it the sort of traditional SaaS way. We just did it our way. And people came on and they were like, wait, is this outbound? Well, typically in traditional sense, this is not how outbound is defined. But we were growing the business. Ultimately, that was the testament. It was like we're 3Xing and 2Xing. And I think that was a lot to do with the folks you hired, the folks we had on the sales team. And I think you and I being completely aligned in our focus on growing business. And I love that you and the marketing team had so much accountability to revenue, which wasn't typical, but I love that. Like when revenue was down, I knew you were stressed as I was stressed. Like you weren't like, oh, I'm going to go focus on something else. You're like, no, we got to grow revenue and I'm stressed. What do we do? So I think that really helped because we had each other's backs.
Yeah, I think my mentality the whole time was just how could Lattice be successful? I didn't really care about whether it was marketing or sales, and and how we sort of get there. And like, yeah, companies, it's funny you mentioned that, 'cause, yeah, companies spend so much time just counting the beans and spend so much process trying to figure out who goes what. And like, I think we were early to understanding like the B2B buyer journey is not just linear. It's not just outbound or inbound. It's probably both. And like the outbound person saw a marketing thing, and then the outbound person came inbound later. And it's like, you just end up fighting about like literally nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's funny how what companies trip themselves up. Switching gears, to like building a career in sales, especially as a woman, there's a huge gender and diversity gap in tech. And as a woman in tech yourself, who's risen to a CRO and C-suite, I'm curious, like, what advice you give to other women in sales and more broadly, like who want the same things sort of you've gotten. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I think it's hard to get advice because I think it's so personal. I remember when I first moved into management, that's when I realized that there is this huge gap. Because when I was a rep, there was like, enough women on the floor, and it didn't feel like the gap existed. Move into management, and I was like, wow, I'm like one or two women on so many calls. And the higher you go, it was 90% of the time it was like you're the only woman on every call. And over time, you like, I don't even notice it anymore. But and the representation gap is real. But I think for me, having a strong why around why I'm doing this, like, has always sort of kept me going. Because when I first moved into when I was a rep and I became successful, I was like, I'm never doing any other job. This is amazing. I make a lot of money. I can get my job done in 5 hours a day. Like, why would I do anything else? And then at some point I was like, I love coaching other people. And so management became much more enticing to me. And so I did that, and I was like, this is awesome. I've got my team, I've got my culture. Why would I do anything else? And then over time, I was like, if I really want to change how sales orgs are built from the ground up, I've got to have a bigger seat at the table. Like, I can't, I can be this manager and be happy in what I'm doing, but I really want to help change the game of how sales orgs are built. And so that became my why for almost a decade. And it was helpful in moments of where I was like, do I really want to do this? Like, so I think having a strong why, like why you're doing something, really served me. And I didn't know, every 18 months, I was like, am I enjoying this? Yes, no. What am I enjoying? How do I do more of that? Like, I wasn't someone who knew early I wanted to be CRO or even management. And, I think that surprises people because everyone's like, I knew I wanted to be CRO. And I'm like, I wasn't that person. Where building a sales org where a younger me would have felt like I was having more fun. I felt more comfortable being myself. And yeah, I hope more women continue to embrace sort of what makes them special and their why, and run their own race.
So you're a free agent right now. You're not actually leading a sales org, but things are really weird in the economy and in SaaS today. It's very different than, like, I think when it was like building Lattice, there's a slowdown across the board. And, if you were leading a sales team, I'm curious, like, how you would approach it. How do you think this all changes sales, and how do you keep sales teams motivated in today's environment?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a lot of founders and sales leaders that are sort of battling on the front lines with their teams in this environment. And I remember when I, first started in management, which was like right after the 2008 bubble, and it was hard because there was a lot of sort of um, lot of lack, a lot of sort of risk aversion in market by buyers, and there's more scrutiny on deals. And as a salesperson, you're used to getting rejected 80% of the time, and now it's like even the 20% of the time you have to. The bar is much, much higher. And so, how do you keep a sales team motivated through it? I think the one piece of advice that I've made this mistake where when things are tough as a sales leader, you want to make all the changes all the time. Where you're like, let's do these three things, and then let's change our sales process, and let's change our messaging, and then let's change the org structure, because you think that that's the way to drive progress. Whereas it's just action. In my opinion, it's just action for the sake of it. And sometimes the best thing you can do for your team is be patient, be confident, and just reiterate why they've joined this company, why this company is great, why they're a great salesperson selling this thing, and getting them to believe. And I think we need more sales leaders being like chief inspiration officers versus, just focusing on the business and the metrics, because the team really need that. Like, you're taking on all these, it's easy to feel defeated, especially remotely. You're sitting in your home office, getting losses. So a lot of advice that I give sales leaders out there today is like, make less changes, ignore the noise, because there's so much out there where you're like, I should do product-led growth, I should do something else, I should, not have a BDR team. And it's like, no, just trust the process, focus on your business, create the plan, and just, sort of be the inspirational leader that brings energy to your team, because they really, really need it in this environment.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation, Dini. It's been really fun looking back on our Lattice time together. If people want to find you, where's the best place for them to reach out? LinkedIn or somewhere else?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place to find me.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Dini. That's a wrap on another episode of Grow and Tell. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, or find every episode at growandtellshow.com. I'm your host, Alex Krakov. Thank you for listening.